Hi, and welcome to the screencast. This is going to be a short one on blood vessels, and then we'll do a separate one for the lymphatic system. Just because if I want this to be free, I've got a 15-minute time limit. So, what do we want to know about blood vessels? If you read this text on your handout, I'm just going to go over them here. So, just remember that we defined an artery as anything that's carrying blood away from the heart, and then a vein as anything that's carrying blood back to the heart. What we didn't talk about was sort of where the two meet, which is capillaries. And we don't have time to go over the structure of a capillary and different types of capillaries, but you just want to know that this is where gas exchange takes place, and this is where nutrient exchange takes place. So it's sort of where the rubber hits the road for your blood vessels. This slide we are skipping. We don't really care about blood flow. We don't have time to go into it. And we've already talked about blood pressure, so we're also not going to worry about that. Resistance we will talk about a little bit. Resistance, as it says here, you just want to know is opposition to flow. And as far as we're concerned, flow is a good thing, right? We want blood to flow through tissues. So resistance is the enemy because that cuts down on blood flow. And we have these three different factors that are going to affect resistance, which we'll talk about each one briefly. So viscosity remains relatively constant throughout your lifetime. If your blood liquid levels, if your hydration state varied to the point where it was affecting the viscosity of your bloodstream, you'd be in deep trouble before you even got to the point where viscosity was being affected. So for the most part, it doesn't play a role for most people. Nor does blood vessel length. But if you do have a longer distance for blood to travel, a longer vessel, then this is going to increase the resistance. So people who are taller or just have larger bodies tend to have more resistance. For them, this ends up increasing their blood pressure, and it's why being overweight increases the amount of tissue that you have to bring blood to. That brings your blood pressure up, and it can be hard on the heart. And it's also why taller people don't necessarily live as long as shorter people. Then blood vessel radius. This you want to know does change quite a bit or can be regulated by the body. We've already talked about your fight or flight responses, which can change vasodilation and vasoconstriction and direct blood flow. You should also know that there are other mechanisms that we don't have time to go into that control vasodilation and vasoconstriction of blood vessels, specifically arteries, that serve different organs or different parts of the body so that your circulatory system can fine tune which organs are getting blood and which ones are getting less or not so much blood. So if you vasoconstrict and decrease the radius in a blood vessel, you're going to increase the resistance, and that's going to cut down on flow. Also, things like atherosclerosis, hardening of the arteries, or the accumulation of fat on the inside of the arteries also increases resistance and cuts down on blood flow. So now we get into this slide right here. Basically, all I want you to know from this slide is to note this steep drop in pressure as you go from arteries through capillaries into venules and then veins. So understand that arterial pressure is much higher than venous pressure, and venous pressure approaches zero as you get into the vena cava. Let's see. I didn't see this slide coming. This we have already talked about, so we can just skip over it. Here, I have changed the slides a little bit. I apologize for that. All the same information is still there. I just moved the pictures around. So as we were saying before, your venous pressure is very low. And because of this, your body needs some help making sure that the venous blood gets back to the heart. If you recall, venous return is very important for cardiac output. So the easier it is to get blood back to the heart, the easier it is for the heart to pump. So venous return is huge for cardiac output. So we're going to have these two mechanisms that increase venous return. The first is called the respiratory pump, and it's relatively simple. So here's your diaphragm. When you inhale, your diaphragm pushes down. This increases the pressure in your abdominal cavity, decreases the pressure in your thoracic cavity, thereby basically squeezing the blood from your abdomen up into your thoracic cavity and back to your heart. And if you think about this, it's really neat that it works out this way, because if you're exercising, you're also breathing harder. And you're breathing harder because your muscles need oxygen, so they also need increased blood flow to get that oxygen. So simply the mechanics of exercising or breathing harder increases venous return, which then also increases cardiac output without your heart having to necessarily work harder. You're basically priming the pump or helping the heart pump just by putting more blood back into it. The muscular pump is another mechanism whereby blood is encouraged to flow back to the heart. This works because your veins are in compartments with muscles, surrounded by connective tissue. So when your muscles contract and they get wider or thicker, that puts pressure or increases pressure within the compartment, and that puts pressure on all of the veins. Because the veins have valves in them that only allow for one-way direction of blood flow, increased muscular activity increases the pressure on your veins and basically milks the blood or pushes the blood back toward the heart. So again, you'll notice if you're exercising, you're using your muscles, and the simple mechanics of muscular contraction also increases venous return and aids in increasing cardiac output. So you have these these two mechanisms that increase cardiac output simply as a result of physical activity, as opposed to in response to physical activity. And then also down here, there's just this added note that vasoconstriction of the veins under sympathetic control can increase venous return. I do not know how robust of a mechanism that is. I know that the respiratory pump and the muscular pump are both very robust. So that's 8 minutes for blood vessels. That's everything you need to know for chapter 18. Next up, chapter 19.